Someone in your group is gone. They were here this morning breathing, moving, familiar, and now they are not. The body is still here. The weight is the same. The face is the same. But the thing that made them them has left, and what remains is already beginning to change in ways that are urgent and undeniable. You have no shovel, no ceremony, no tradition, no word for death that abstracts it into something manageable. You have a body, and you have the rest of your group watching you, and you have to decide what to do right now. This is the situation every human group on Earth faced for the vast majority of human history, before the first formal burial, before the first grave good, before any of the rituals we now consider universal. What did they actually do? The archaeological record is mostly silent, but where it does speak, the answer is darker, stranger, and more emotionally complex than any textbook has been comfortable saying out loud. The answer isn't one thing. There are layers here in sky burials, in defleshing marks on ancient bones, in the evidence of grief so old it predates anatomically modern humans. Each layer tells you something about what we are at the core. Let's go. Start with the assumption that burial is ancient and universal. It feels that way. Every human culture that has ever been documented practices some form of mortuary ritual. The oldest accepted formal burial in the archaeological record is from Kavze Cave in Israel, dated to approximately 100,000 years ago. Anatomically modern humans buried in a flexed position with red ochre and shells, suggesting intentional placement. School Cave nearby has burials from roughly the same period. But here is the number that should stop you. Anatomically modern Homo sapiens has existed for at least 300,000 years, possibly longer if you accept the Jebel Irhoud fossils from Morocco that John Hublin and colleagues at the Max Planck Institute dated in 2017 to around 315,000 years ago. That leaves a gap of at least 200,000 years, possibly much longer, during which our species existed, had language, had social groups, had the cognitive capacity for everything we now call human, and left almost no evidence of formal burial at all. Those 200,000 years had bodies. What happened to them? Here's where it gets strange. The honest answer begins with what is most obvious, but least discussed: exposure. In the vast majority of hunter-gatherer contexts before formal burial became widespread, the simplest response to a body was to leave it, not out of indifference, but because nomadic groups could not carry the dead, could not remain in one place indefinitely, and often did not have the tools for excavation in hard or rocky terrain. Ethnographic records from historically documented nomadic peoples show a wide spectrum of practices, some involving elaborate ceremony performed over the body before departure, others involving simple placement in a sheltered spot with the group continuing its movement. The Zoroastrian tradition of sky burial, placing the dead on elevated stone platforms called dakmas for vultures to consume, is a formalized version of exposure that has been practiced continuously for at least 3,000 years in Iran and Central Asia and is still practiced in Tibet. It is not primitive. It is a theology of return, the idea that the body belongs to the earth and should be returned to it through the most direct available path. Exposure to scavengers is, in terms of sheer duration, probably the oldest human mortuary practice by a large margin. We just don't talk about it because it is uncomfortable to say. Now, let's talk about something the archaeological record says directly in bone defleshing. At multiple sites across Europe and the Middle East, ancient human bones have been found bearing cut marks that are not consistent with butchery for food consumption. The pattern of marks is different. Mary Steiner at the University of Arizona and Francesco De Rico at the University of Bordeaux have both analyzed assemblages where human bones show systematic cut marks around major muscle attachment points consistent with deliberate, careful removal of soft tissue from a corpse. At Krapina in Croatia, Neanderthal bones dated to roughly 130,000 years ago show these marks on over 80% of the skeletal elements analyzed. The interpretation remains debated, but a significant body of research argues for what is called mortuary, defleshing the deliberate removal of flesh from the dead by their own group, not as cannibalism for nutrition, but as a funerary practice. In some indigenous cultures of the Americas, documented in historical records, defleshing was performed to reduce the body to clean bone, which was then preserved, carried, or interred in secondary burial. The body was processed. The bones were kept. This is grief expressed through procedure, a ritual relationship with the physical remains that is unrecognizable to modern Western sensibilities, but no less meaningful for that. Here's something else that almost never comes up. The evidence for grief, for emotional response to death, goes back further than our own species. Neanderthal burials at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, analyzed originally by Ralph Selecki in the 1950s and 60s, and reanalyzed continuously since, include at least one individual, Shanidar IV, whose grave contained pollen clusters that Selecki famously interpreted as evidence of deliberate flower placement. The flower burial interpretation has been contested. Eric Trinkhaus at Washington University and others have argued the pollen may have been introduced by burrowing rodents. But the broader pattern at Shanidar is harder to dismiss. Shanidar I, a Neanderthal male who died around 45,000 years ago, had survived to middle age with a withered right arm, damaged eye socket, and healed fractures indicating severe injury years before death. He could not have survived those injuries without sustained care from others in his group. The group fed him, protected him, carried him. For years, a person who contributed little to subsistence activities by any practical measure. That is not instinct. That is something that looks like love. And when he died, his group did not simply leave him. He was found in a specific resting position, in a pit, with deliberate placement visible in the skeletal arrangement. Whatever they did, it was intentional. So here's the part nobody tells you. The question of what ancient humans did with their dead is really a question about when humans started caring enough to do anything. And the answer from the fossil record is earlier than we can currently measure, and in more ways than we have categories for. At Rising Star Cave in South Africa, Lee Berger at the University of the Witwatersrand announced in 2023 that Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin with a cranial capacity roughly one-third of modern humans, had apparently deposited their dead in the deep cave system deliberately, with no evidence of predator activity or accidental death. The engravings found near the remains suggest intentional marking. Homo naledi had a brain smaller than a chimpanzee's. If deliberate disposal of the dead is confirmed there, it pushes back the origin of mortuary behavior by hundreds of thousands of years to a species we had previously assumed lacked the cognitive architecture for symbolic behavior entirely. Grief, it appears, does not require a modern brain. It may be older than modern thought. The body is still there. The face is still the same. You are standing over someone who was here this morning. You have no shovel, no ceremony, no tradition, but you feel something urgent and specific that makes you unable to simply walk away. That feeling, that inability to treat the dead as simply matter, is the oldest human thing documented in the fossil record. Older than art, older than agriculture, older than formal language, almost certainly. What ancient humans did with their dead was not one thing. They left them exposed. They defleshed them. They carried their bones. They buried them with flowers whose names they didn't have words for yet. They cared for the dying for years before the dying ended. The practices were different everywhere. The feeling underneath all of them was the same. It is the same feeling you would have standing there 60,000 years ago in a cave in the dark. You would not walk away either.